I'd like to ask that instead of having the clerk read the roll, if we could just do a round of introductions. We've got Charlie's first time here. I think that'd be a good way to start. If you want to start with Matt.
Good morning, I'm Matt Mayberry. I'm the CEO of the New Hampshire Home Builders Association.
Charlie Levesque, and I am the licensed forester on the commission.
Senator David Rochefort, Senate District 1.
Mark Brady, Coast County Administrator.
Representative Arnold Davis, Coast District 2.
Representative Mike Willett, Coas District 3.
Ray McGowan, Coas County Commissioner, District 3.
Eric Murphy from East Coast Lumber. I'm here representing the New Hampshire Retail Lumber Association.
Chris Fife here representing New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association.
Patrick Hackley, Director for the Division of Forests and Lands and designee for DNCR.
And Jennifer Ramsey, Tax Policy Counsel for the Department of Revenue Administration.
We have two excused absence. Michael Phelps, Bee Owner Grant Conservation, and Representative Jim Turney, Coas District 1. Both Jim's on a medical leave, and I'm not. I think it's business for Phelps. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting?
Motion to adopt?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Oh, yes, yes. Go ahead, Charlie.
This is part of the summary of my presentation from November. About middle of the page is a series of bullets. This one is quality and integrity. The last sub-bullet under that is called leakage. It says ensuring that protecting one forest doesn't simply shift harvesting to, and it should say to another forest of the same landowner or something like that.
Okay.
Just these are great summary notes of that PowerPoint I gave. I'm very impressed with what it did.
Chairman, motion to adopt as amended?
Do I have a second? Okay, we have a motion by Matt Mayberry and a second by Eric Murphy. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
One abstain. Senator Rochefort. Motion carries. Next, I'd like to introduce Sarah Hall, who's here with the American Forest Foundation to give us a presentation. Good morning. Thank you for coming up. I know the weather wasn't that great.
Happy to be here. Thank you for having me. And good morning, everybody. So my name is Sarah Hall, and I'm the Director of Forestry for the American Forest Foundation and the Family Forest Carbon Program. And today I'm going to talk about the program and the innovative opportunities for both landowners and foresters, but just wanted to start out by a little introduction to myself. So I've been with the American Forest Foundation for about 5 years, coming up in April, and started actually as the first staff forester with AFF, and now lead the forestry team of about 20 foresters, as well as helping to manage the over 200 consulting foresters that partner with us in the program, and sort of drive our strategy of how to best administer the technical assistance to our landowners and how to support the consulting foresters that are working with our landowners in the program and interested landowners, which we have a lot of. Just a little bit of background. Before I came to AFF, I actually did work for the forest products industry in Pennsylvania as the executive director of a hardwood utilization group. So have worked on both sides of the forest product industry and carbon, and grew up in rural Pennsylvania, black cherry capital of the world. So, understand the importance of the timber industry to rural markets, and, joined carbon basically to just investigate a new opportunity for landowners to help them manage their land. And so, here today to talk about the Family Forest Carbon Program and what that offering is for our landowners. All right. So just to go over a quick agenda, I'm going to do a very brief program overview, talk a little bit about the financial, forestry, and community benefits of the program. And then I'm really going to dive into sort of the details of our program through landowner stories and their experiences with it. And then after that, I'm happy to take questions. Okay, so who is the American Forest Foundation? Better start with that just so everybody understands who we are. We are a national conservation nonprofit organization with a long history of empowering forest landowners to make meaningful conservation impact on their land. And so I'm sure many of you know the American Tree Farm sign there. We've been administering that program for many decades through the state committees. So that has been our claim to fame, but we've also had a number of initiatives like the White Oak Initiative and other conservation programs throughout our history, and really basically try to cater to the greatest conservation need at the time, which is what brings us to the Family Forest Carbon Program, which is a program really designed for forest landowners who are looking to leverage that market to achieve some income to steward their land. And so historically, only large landowners had access to the carbon markets, typically, in the thousands of acres, just due to the cost of the administration of generating those credits and the monitoring, reporting, and verification that it takes to generate those credits. And so what the American Forest Foundation did several years ago, we started on the ground in 2020 in Pennsylvania, is basically come up with a innovative methodology that allows us to sort of cut those costs at a landscape level and offer this program all the way down to landowners with as little as 30 acres. We also do have an extra small landowner pilot that goes down to a minimum of 15 acres, but most of our landowners are in the 30 acreage and up. So what we're all about is really providing landowners those annual payments, so the financial incentive, and the technical assistance is really the important part in my eyes, to implement sustainable forest management practices on their land. So our biggest practices are called improved forest management practices. So we are paying landowners to put those improved forest management practices on the ground. We're not necessarily paying directly for that carbon. Those improved forest management practices are scientifically proven through our methodology to enhance the carbon on the ground, which is eventually what we sell on a credit, but we are paying the landowner to implement an improved forest management practice. So as I said, we started in Pennsylvania as a very small pilot program, and we are now in 20 states, and scaling that across the country. We have 190,000 plus acres enrolled, which is a lot for a small family, forest carbon program. However, as I'm sure you all know, it's not very much in terms of our total forest land. So this is just one tool in the toolbox. We are certainly not trying to enroll everybody in a carbon program. We're trying to provide a tool for landowners to help manage their land and manage it more sustainably. So it is a lot, but certainly a small percentage in terms of the forest land total. Right now we have a little over 1,400 acres or landowners enrolled. So we are inching up. And so about 1,400 landowners, and we've committed about $51 million to those families that are enrolled in the program. So it is a good chunk for them to help manage their land. We are a smaller program, so we really do target those smaller landowners. Our average size is about 137 acres, and most of them are, really in that 30 to 100, but we do have some larger landowners involved as well. What I want to talk about too is really what the goals that these landowners have that are coming to us. And I think when people think about carbon, they think no harvesting. And that is just absolutely not true with our program. We are the American Forest Foundation. We think management and active management is important. Working forests are important. And so we want to provide landowners the tools to do that within our allowances. And so a majority of our enrolled landowners, over 60% and a little bit higher actually do have prescribed harvests in their forest management plans. And there are foresters helping to administer those harvests throughout the life of their contract. And of course, most of those landowners use their land for recreation, for hunting, and they're able to do that within our program. There's no restrictions on any, recreation or things that are happening. They can even keep their trails, maintain trails for motorized vehicles, that sort of thing. We exclude those areas in our projects. And most families, most landowners do plan to keep their land in their family, and that's where that financial assistance is so important. They really need some finance to help pay the taxes, to give it to their heirs, to keep the forest in good health for generations to come. And so that's where our program comes in and tries to provide that financial assistance, but most importantly, the technical assistance. Most landowners that are coming to us, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a forester for technical assistance, just some answers. A lot of them are overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. And so they're just coming to us looking for technical assistance, and we connect them to lots of consulting foresters out there, private consulting foresters. So one of the things that was really important to me, and I found very interesting when I joined AFF, I sat in a lot of working groups when I worked in the industry on how to engage a different pool of landowners. You have a lot of landowners that are involved in sustainable forestry circles, and it's a lot of the same bucket of landowners. And what I found fascinating is that our unique marketing and our effective marketing is really reaching a different population of people. And so we're really engaging the unengaged. We're bringing landowners who maybe have never been engaged or for whatever reason have stopped being engaged in forestry back into the pipeline. We just hit a different type of landowner, and it's been really interesting how many of those have come in. So, about 77% of our enrolled landowners did not have a forest management plan before our program. And most of them also had not engaged with a forester. So in that way, we're actually bringing, more landowners into active management in the long term and impacting that long-term timber supply. So to dial in on New Hampshire stats, we have about 1,453 acres enrolled. It's only 13 woodlands. If you think about that, it's only 0.0003% of the forest land. So again, a tool in the toolbox. Landowners that we have had come in, though, that are interested, you can see on this map, come from constituents all over the state. And that equates to almost 70,000 acres or 396 landowners. Again, only 0.01% of the forest land in the state. So it's a small percentage. We want to encourage them into active management. And their participation is voluntary. That's from when they sign up on the website. There's no obligations if they're just looking for more information. So it's their right to kind of pursue whatever programs are out there to help them manage their land. And we want to make sure that the interested landowners and their enrollment aligns with their goals. So when they come into our system, they do talk to staff from start to finish. So they're going to get connected with a forester. That could be a staff forester or a consultant. And we want to make sure and talk to them immediately about what their goals are. And then we also want to look at the forest health and the condition of the forest to make sure this program is a good fit. If they have stands or the majority of the forests, say, are really mature and they need harvested, it might not be a good fit. We don't enroll those landowners. Or if they want to do a heavier regeneration harvest, we may exclude that stand that needs that. So our landowners are not required to enroll all of their forest land. We built that flexibility into our program so that if there are stands that need some heavier harvests with beyond our allowances, we can exclude those and allow those sustainable practices to happen on the ground. So again, carbon is just one tool. This program is not for every single landowner. It's not for every forest. And we want to make sure that anyone who enrolls is a good fit. Because again, it is a 20-year contract, and if they breach, it's a risk to us. So we want to make sure that they're happy with the program, that their forest fits the program. And the
Chairman, can we ask questions?
Do you
However
want to
you
wait
wanna
till,
do it.
I'll allow this one.
So I'm just looking, we have a registry in New Hampshire. Anybody who's signed up with a program has to be involved, enroll into the registry. And the registry, I think has only 7 that are listed in the program. So you've got almost double that from what you just said. So there's a bunch of people who are not enrolled. And Director Hackley, if I made a mistake, I printed this out, I think, yesterday or the day before, but I think that's all it shows at this point. So there are a number of folks who are not following the law here and enrolling in the registry.
So they could be new enrollees, like recent enrollees, and we have a little bit of time to put them into the registry. So I could definitely look into the details of that for you. I will say though that we actually we do all of that administrative work for the landowner. We don't want to put that burden on the landowner. So our contracts team actually puts them in the registry. So the landowners don't have to do that themselves. We do it for them when they enroll.
I have a copy of the registry here, and I believe there's 15 entries to date.
Yeah, but there's only 7 that are in that program.
Okay, yeah,
Right?
yes, but,
Of the 15.
and there is a moratorium right now, so
Anything
there
over
wouldn't be
500.
any new ones allowed to
Well,
come in.
over-
They'd be under 500.
It'd be under 500.
Oh,
yeah.
yes,
But I can certainly, we can look into that and follow up, but that's my gut, is that they probably just enrolled and haven't been through that registry process.
okay.
So I just wanted to note too, that when carbon's not a good fit, we do connect those landowners to other trusted sources in New Hampshire. So, you know, your Division of Forests and Lands, your extension offices, USDA, NRCS, local consulting foresters. So even if they're not a good fit for our program, we want to make sure we provide them with the good tools to sustainably manage their land. Okay, so some of the financial benefits to landowners. There is a guaranteed annual payment that they can use for anything. We hope they use it and put it into their forest, but a lot of them do use it for their taxes. That's why they're coming to us, to keep their forests as forests. Enrollment does come at no cost to the landowner, and again, that's even when they sign up. There's no obligations. And our practices do result in healthier, more resilient forests, which does improve the long-term forest value, not only for the landowner, but for those forest products that will come when those forests do become harvested. They do retain full ownership of their land, so their privacy, control of their land, and they continue to use the property for personal use, like recreation, hunting, those sorts of things. We do own just the carbon rights, so they continue to own the timber rights, the land rights, all of those things. We just own the carbon rights for 20 years. In terms of forest management resources, I really do think this is why the majority of our landowners are coming to us. Again, over 77% of them do not have a forest management plan. We do require that landowners have a forest management plan within 2 years of enrollment. So we will provide a free forest management plan to every single landowner who does not have one. If a landowner is interested in USDA NRCS practices, then we will pay a stipend to help basically defer the costs of getting that third-party approved plan that they need for NRCS. So once they have that plan, it can actually rank them up in NRCS cost share funding opportunities. So that is another benefit of our program. And then we do make sure that that management plan is customized for each landowner and each property. So again, we talk about their goals. Most of the landowners have wildlife habitat goals. Those are the types of things that we're talking about, invasive species, and we address those in the forest management plan for each landowner. And that technical assistance helps them with their stewardship for both them, but also their families and generationally. So those forest management plans are a really great legacy planning tool for generations and for their heirs. And then, of course, we work with a number of partners like the Audubon Society, of course, the American Tree Farm System, and USDA NRCS and other partners. So they also have a community of partners that they can go to look for technical assistance as well. Things like wildlife habitat restoration improvements, soil and water quality improvements, and the biggest one being timber stand improvements. So when they're looking to do some thinning and things to invigorate the forest, which is allowed under our program. All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit to talk about some of the landowners and the landowner experiences in our program. This is Ed Fisher there on the right, and some of the members of a nonprofit that he and his family had started. So I just want to start with a quote that he, said, which is, "I grew up dirt poor. My mom and dad worked hard, but we were definitely in the lower class financially. It was always my dream to buy a piece of property where family could come and enjoy it, hunt, fish, that type of thing." So, they also founded a nonprofit called the Leak Hunting and Mountain Preserve, which hosts handicapped, accessible camping, hunting, fishing, and outdoor activities for wounded veterans. And he and his family and that nonprofit have been able to continue all of those activities within our program. It's really important to us that our landowners can continue to do that type of recreation and, outreach on their own properties. And he, like many other landowners, said that the taxes on the property really were the toughest challenge in managing it. He had started with about 130 acres back in 2004, and now has, acquired some land around it that is up to about 400 acres, which he uses for the nonprofit and his family's recreation. And it's the taxes, that were a challenge. And so he saw our program needed some financial assistance to keep that forest and keep that land, and ended up enrolling in the program to help him pay the taxes via that guaranteed annual payment per year. And so he worked with some of our foresters. We wrote up a 46-page management plan for him and his family. And it's had great beneficial impact, but has not impacted any of the normal activities that they're doing on the land. And so helping to preserve its long-term health, and that included harvesting timber. That was one of his main goals from the start. And so, quote, "They showed me if I didn't cut some of my trees, then I was going to lose a lot of my forest," Fisher said. So this is actually an example where he didn't know he needed to do a cut, and we actually, recommended that a cut be done, and so he did that. So with the guidance of the foresters involved with our program, they did a select harvest, which within our allowances, so they cut up, we allow about up to 25% to be cut. So they cut about 20% of a 250 acre forested parcel of land, which he said, quote, "was just enough to maintain good forest health." So not only did he get financial assistance from the payments, but he got, some financial assistance also through the revenue he made through that sale and through those forest products. So Fisher did quote that he's really benefited from the management practices and the forester that they assigned to me. "I'm very glad that I joined the carbon program, not only for myself, but for my forests. They had put a whole bunch of work into that property, and we want to make sure that that sustainability and that forest health continues." Over the 20-year contract, you can see there is about $119,000 that his family will generate in financial assistance. Louise Hartman there on the right. She's one of my favorite stories. I've worked personally with her and been on her land many times, as recently as this fall. She was not actively engaged at all in forest management. So she had inherited the property from her mom, and she remembers that her grandfather had also done what's called a high grade, so taking the best and leaving the rest. And that stand, I've stood in it, is still stunted from that activity, over 20 years ago, and still does not have merchantable timber on it. So we went in, met with Louise. We actually connected her to a consulting forester, and she worked with him to develop a plan for her property. And, she knows now what has to be done, what tree she has, what the value is, and what she's supposed to do. And so she has since rehired the enrollment forester that we put her with to mark a timber stand improvement in her forest. It's actually just to the left of where she's standing. You would see marked trees. And so this is someone who had been completely unengaged from forestry for a number of decades, just because of what the unsustainable activity that she saw, and just didn't know what to do. Her and her sister just sort of became hands off because they just didn't know how to fix it and what to do from there. And so that technical assistance actually brought her back into active management. It's really been a great story. She's even went as far as to now become a forest steward through Penn State. So Luis is really happy to be in the program, and we're really happy to have her. And even at a smaller contract value, I think, $28,000 is a lot of money for three sisters that are looking for help. The Brubeck family have a tree farm in West Virginia, and they routinely use that land to enjoy their outdoors, especially to hunt, which many of our landowners do. Jeremy said that the property, in talking with foresters, both inside our program and outside of it, actually does have good marketable timber, but it really could use to about 10 to 15 years to grow a little bit longer. However, he needed some financial assistance to pay the taxes to do some of the management on the land. And so this is a situation where, you know, some landowners, because they need that financial assistance, may cut the timber too early. Because we provide some financial assistance each year, he's able to now wait until that timber is at the right maturity and at a higher quality to cut it. And so really what our practices are, if you think about it, are just an extended rotation practice, which in much research has shown that, you know, actually creates more valuable timber in the long run. And so he's going to wait to do sort of that major harvest. However, he can do some smaller sustainable harvests and some thinning, you know, to allow those other mature trees to grow. And he's able to do that through our program. So his father, Earl, also owned the land before him, expressed the excitement about the program's income and, more importantly, that forest management plan. And so they're really looking to keep that generationally, as you can see here, for his daughter, and keep that land in their family and keep that forest as forest. And the financial assistance and the technical assistance have helped him to do that. This one's a little bit closer to home here in Vermont. So these are two examples where landowners were able to continue their major businesses and their recreation businesses and thrive within the program. So for the Johnsons, who are pictured there at the top, they were able to continue their maple sugaring without any changes, you know, when entering our program. These landowners are enrolled in what's called our Enhance Your Woodland category of our program, which is a program that if a landowner comes in and says, we'd like to do some harvesting, we enroll them in that practice so that they have the ability to do some of that harvesting. Again, they got forest management plans developed for their land, which again are a great legacy tool. And overall, they really feel positively about the program. They're enrolled in current use, which is true also here in New Hampshire, that our program is compatible with current use. When a landowner comes in, we ask them if they are involved in any sort of current use or other commitment, and we ensure that our practices are compatible with that. So we do not want to jeopardize any commitments that landowners have, especially with the state current use programs. And so we vet those, every single one, on a case-by-case basis. And he even went as far as to quote that he thinks the program helps offer additionality to the current use protections of the property because it puts another layer of protection on the forest, again, keeping those forests as forests, which is pretty much the purpose of a lot of current use programs. The next ones there at the bottom is called Sleepy Hollow, and they run a unique, basically recreation business, so cross-country ski area as well as mountain biking and hiking. It's a beautiful location, so they have wedding venues and beds and breakfasts. Recreation is an integral part of their business model, and they were able to keep doing all of the recreation that is within their business model in the program. And so they actually had a forester when they came into the program, and many of our landowners do. In those cases, we want to, we don't want to disconnect them from their landowner or from their forester. And so we will work with the forester if they want to become a part of our program, or even if they don't, we will make sure that our goals align with the current forester that they have. In this case, their forester was excited about it. And so, one of the biggest incentives for Sleepy Hollow was the money that they get for implementing those sustainable forestry practices that produce those carbon credits. However, they do have a neighbor who is a logger and has been logging on their land for about 7 or 8 years. And so it was really, really important to them that their neighbor could keep doing their business. He has a firewood business, wanted to make sure that he could keep doing that his enrollment in the program wouldn't jeopardize that for his neighbor. And so we worked with them, worked with his forester, worked with his neighbor to ensure that they could continue doing that. So under the Enhance Your Woodland practice, they are allowed to do some sustainable harvests, as I've said, and his neighbor was able to continue his business, which was really important to the landowner. Quote, "It makes me happy to know he can stay in business and continue to work. Forest products are important as well as the benefits to the environment." So again, it's definitely a balance here. We understand the importance of forest products in the forest products industry. And we want to make sure our landowners can do some harvesting and support that, and that they're doing the right types of harvest. So, after the 20-year contract, if they want to do a regeneration harvest or something like that, they have the assistance and the know-how to do that. And their contract value is about $142,000 over the 20 years. All right, with that, I just want to talk a little bit about our consulting forester opportunities, because consulting foresters are a big piece of the program and are a really important partner to administer this program. It does grow their business, provides more options for their clients, and expands their portfolio. So it's voluntary if they want to be involved with our program. But it has allowed a lot of consultants to sort of expand their business beyond just, the traditional timber markets. And so they can choose to work with just their clients, or they can also choose to get leads from us, again, expanding their business. We have paid over $3 million to consultants for their work for us within the program. And we have over 200 consultants that work with us across the country, across the 20 states. We're always looking for more. If anybody is ever interested, we'd be happy to have you as a partner. And with that, I would be happy to take questions. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you for that presentation. I'm interested if you could just spend a little bit of time connecting carbon markets in general to this program. Like how do carbon markets, you talked about carbon credits and the fact that AFF owns those, I guess, over the term of the contract. What does AFF do with those? How does that support, or what's the relationship there?
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this program is funded through many different things, the carbon market being one of them. We also have philanthropic dollars and grants and things like that to get our program going. And so our methodology is at a landscape level. That's what has allowed us to go down to as little as 30 acres. So we do a random selection of enrolled properties. And so it doesn't mean that every single landowner will have those, what we call monitor reporting and verification plots on their land. We do a random selection, kind of like a medical trial is how we built our program. And we go out and measure the carbon on those randomly selected properties. And we compare that to FIA data. So we pick 10 FIA plots that are similar. They have like 14 covariates, we call them. So what's the stocking level? What are the species in the forest? So we try to compare apples to apples of our enrolled properties versus unenrolled. And so using that FIA data, our enrolled properties, which may do a little bit of harvesting, but really it's about extended rotation and preventing high grading. That additional carbon, the delta between our enrolled properties and our unenrolled, is what we sell in a carbon credit. And so we do agreements with, private companies who are looking to get to net zero. As a nonprofit, American Forest Foundation, we do thoroughly vet who we sell our credits to. So they go through a very rigorous process to ensure that they are actually trying to do everything they can to reduce their emissions. Nobody can, right? Even us, it's very difficult to eliminate completely your emissions. And so they voluntarily buy these credits to offset, to get to net zero. It's usually in their company's sustainability goals, that sort of thing. So that is the credit that we sell.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. Thank you. Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you.
So the way, if I understood correctly, so people contact you and have questions about the carbon market and their property. So you'll send your foresters in, meet with them, act like a consultant, and say, yeah, this is what we can do, this is what you can sell. And then you take it from there and get it in the market, get it sold, and send them a check. And is that,
Almost to the very end part. So our program is a little different in that we guarantee our payments. So basically a landowner comes in, they talk to our staff throughout the whole process. The biggest piece of that being the forester, right, who qualifies their land to see how much of their acreage is eligible. Once they have that eligible acreage, then we provide them with an offer. We pay a per acre rate for that eligible acres. However, because we do our carbon quantification at a landscape level, we take that risk on. I think that is a big positive for the landowner. So, we basically forecast our rates in the increase of the markets over time. And we build that into what we pay landowners. And so they get that guaranteed payment no matter what the market does. If the market skyrockets, say in 10 years, we do have a profit sharing clause in our contract. But they will get that payment no matter what the carbon market does. And so we take that risk that we will be able to generate those credits long term. And that is the benefit to the landowner.
That was my next question because, carbon, the credits I look at as a commodity market and it's going to fluctuate.
Absolutely.
And that was my question because from what I'm reading, there's going to be a significant demand coming up over the next few years.
Yep, we do have that built in. And we are a nonprofit, right? So we don't have shareholders or anything to account to. That profit's going to go right back to the landowners outside of what it costs for us to administrate the program, of course.
Could I have a follow-up?
Yes.
So, and just to make sure that I understood correctly, that it seems like that you sell most of the credits to the voluntary market.
All of our credits are on the voluntary market. Yep.
I have a question, actually.
Sure.
You had talked about current use. You had talked about people enrolling in this program because they're having a hard time paying their taxes. So some of the states you work in do not have a current use program. Is that correct?
All the current use programs in states are different, right? So we do have a chart that has all the requirements of each state. For example, Pennsylvania is pretty lenient, right? They just have to identify 5 or 6 types of trees. But however, some states have a lot more strict current use, right? Where they have to actively manage and they have to have harvesting in their plans and do all of that. So we have a state by state guide for all of our staff, and our staff vets those on every single state enrollment. So I think most states have current use, probably all of them. There's just different levels of what they require.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One last one. I saw on one of the landowners, they had a contract value of $28,400. That's over the 20-year
That's correct.
plan. Okay.
Yep.
And that gets spread out over the 20 years?
It does, yep. Yeah,
Okay.
so in our early years and up until actually January, we provide 20% upfront. So 20% of the payment is upfront. And that is so that they can get their forest management plan if they want a third-party plan, if they can want to do invasive species or whatever they need to kind of kickstart their forest management. Based on landowner feedback, a lot of landowners just want a flat fee. So we've moved now this year to 5% each year flat fee.
Yep, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in today. And I've got, if the chairman would entertain, hopefully I can get this concise, but if I can't, bear with me. So it looks like the Family Forest Carbon Program, just so I understand, that's an array of options or a array of products, if you will, or services that the American Forest Foundation provides. It's a tools in a toolbox, I think, that you said. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. It's our main program right now.
It is.
We do have different practices for each region. So when we launch a practice within the program, we do carbon modeling. We also want to make sure that that practice fits the forest that we're in. So the forest type, like if it's say oak versus maple dominant, that type of thing. So we cater our practices to the types of forests, and we have different practices within the Family Forest Carbon Program in different regions.
Okay. And then just to piggyback on what my colleague down the table said, just so I understand this and put it in terms that I can understand here, is when you're dealing with the carbon programs and you're offering this service for landowners, and it sounds like these are family plots that they're looking for just an option to maybe even keep the piece of land in the family. And this is a product that they can engage in on a smaller level, 30 acres, let's say. And then you're acting essentially as a no-risk broker. You're a broker, but there's no risk to the, unlike, you engage a real estate broker, if they don't sell the house, then they don't get the money, whereas you guys are taking all that risk on, and then you then are brokering the sale, whether it be to a net zero owner company, whether it be to a philanthropic investor, whether it be, I'm assuming the open market, there's something. So you're taking on that risk, and it's up to you to sell that, and you're brokering that sale for these landowners.
Yeah, correct.
And then just for my own edification, I know a number of colleagues, friends, family members even that are in the tree farm program, and they are exactly what you said. I mean, they're oftentimes, our family owns big pieces of land, and quite frankly, every year the tax bill comes around, we're wondering, we don't have cows on the land anymore, and we're wondering how my family is going to pay those taxes. They don't have no intention, generally speaking, of stripping the land anyway. I mean, they're good stewards anyway. But what your program does is just gives those an option to, God forbid they're not pushed up against the wall to scalp off the 400 acres of on the back lot, because that wouldn't be their intention anyway. But you give them an option for other uses short of clearing it and putting solar panels on it.
That's correct. Yeah, it's the main intent of the program is to keep the land within the family and to keep the forest as forest. And so we, over time, AFF has done a lot, and a lot of other woodland owners associations is like, nobody's intent is to do the wrong thing, right? But when you're backed against the wall, like you said, that oftentimes happens.
Right.
You have to do what you have to do. And so this program provides that annual incentive to help prevent that from happening.
And then, and if I may, one
Yeah,
last,
well,
just to clarify,
yeah.
and you come in as, for these landowners that just are trying to keep the land, you come in as a broker with expertise to shop a product that they have.
Yeah, I mean, we're a
That
nonprofit.
product being
We
carbon.
don't necessarily like to call ourselves a broker, but for
for all
your
intents and purposes, that's what you're
Yes.
you're doing. Yeah,
Yes,
all right,
and
all
we
right.
have, of course, my team, the forestry team, specializes in the forestry part. We have a demand side of the organization that specializes in the credit sales part. So
Yeah.
we make sure that we're staffed with experienced people, so we're de-risking that for the landowner. And so they have those guaranteed payments. And as we generate the carbon over the years, that is what we sell.
Great. You've been very informative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Matt?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, sir. You did a great job.
Thank you.
So good, you took out most of my questions. So well done. But I have a kind of a two-part question, if the chair
Yes.
would allow. So as a condition of the participation is your approval of their management program, correct?
Not necessarily approval. We ensure they have ones, and to be clear, they're actually not even required to follow it, but we strongly encourage that they do. So, if they come into the program with a forest management plan, we will review it and ensure that it has, that it's a good management plan for the landowner. I don't think we've ever not approved a forest management plan, though. Most of them are well written by foresters, right? So if they come in, we'll review it, and they don't have to get another one. That one will be sufficient. We may add a couple things that we need for our Vera, approval within our methodology. But otherwise, we will provide that. So they don't need a forest management plan to enroll, but they do have to have a forest management plan within 2 years of enrollment. So the majority of our landowners, we are actually providing that management plan for them.
So does that management plan then go to the investors to? So,
Nope.
So why, if you don't need a management plan to enter into the program, why do you have to have it within 2 years?
Because with our methodology, what we're trying to do is ensure that the landowners are implementing an improved forest management practice on the ground. That management plan is what gives them the tools to be able to do that. And so they're getting guidance within the plan of how to sustainably manage, how to address invasive species, how to improve wildlife habitat. So It's our way and our methodology to improve the management of the forest, which is then in turn going to generate the carbon. So we're not actually directly paying for it. So the management plan is the tool that they then get from our program in order to do sustainable forestry.
But what if they say in the live free or die state, my land, it's fine, I don't want to do that management plan, and they don't want to do it within 2 years, what happens?
We will write it for them.
Okay.
They don't have to
So
follow
it's
it.
going to happen one way or another.
It is, yeah, but I don't know that we've ever had a landowner that hasn't wanted a plan. Like, there's nothing restrictive in the plan. It's mostly guidance on how to manage it. And so
It's information and education, that's.
yeah,
was a
but they're
good
not
thing.
required to follow how we generate the carbon is within our contract and the allowances that they're allowed to harvest. So they have a certain allowance up to that sort of 25% of what we call basal area, so the area of the trees. That is what is helping us to generate the carbon. The other side of that is that they can't reduce, I don't want to get into the details too much, but they can't reduce their average diameter of the trees. So what we're really doing with our practice is preventing high grading. We're encouraging a more sustainable management on the ground. That is what is generating the carbon. And so if they get a management plan and they say, I don't want to do any of what's in it, that's fine as long as they adhere to our contract terms.
Chairman, may I ask another question?
Yes, you may.
Because humans are involved and people's lives are involved along the way, what happens when they enter this 20-year contract and the principal dies? And the children say, we want out. We're never coming back to New Hampshire, just dump it. Or it's a court or a divorce, or a bankruptcy, or a liquidation. And how would those carbon credits fall into, say, filing for a bankruptcy? Because a lot of these are small businesses. That 85% of small businesses fail. What happens with these contracts and those credits in bankruptcy, divorce, and death?
Yep. So our contract runs with the land. If in your case the heir wanted out of the contract, they would have to pay a penalty. Our
Okay.
penalty is standard 2.5% or 2.5 times what we paid them. So it's not the full contract. It's only what we've paid them to date. As far as the credit sale issue and the fact that that contract is now terminated and we aren't going to be able to generate credits, we take that risk.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what happens. And that was actually a recommendation and feedback we took from the landowners in our early days. It did not run with the land. It was with that landowner who originally signed. And the landowners actually, feedback was, we want it to run with the land. Some people use it almost as a short-term easement and that they want their heirs or the next buyer to manage it the way they did or the vision that they had. And so it does run with the land now.
May I ask one final follow-up?
One more, Matt.
You have the 400 acres of land, and they get approached by a telephone company to put a tower on their land. Do they come and talk with you about that, if that's acceptable management practice for towers or windmills or solar or anything like that?
Yeah. So we deal with those on a case-by-case basis. We have a force majeure clause in our contract for such cases if, like you said, if development comes and it was against their will. It depends on each case. Like and we also look at right-of-ways, easements, that type of thing during our due diligence for our contract. So before a contract is signed, we review all of that. So we see if a telephone has the, a right-of-way to that, and we'll exclude that actually to try to help prevent that for the landowner. If it comes in, later, then, we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis and kind of assess, like, was it the landowner's fault? No, then we probably won't charge a penalty. What we'd probably do is just remove the acres that are impacted and they wouldn't get paid for those acres, the remainder of the contract.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the
Yeah, you're
indulgence.
welcome. Eric.
Thank you. So in listening to all of this, there's payments to the landowners, there's carbon credits being sold. You're a nonprofit organization, so there's no taxes involved. But when you look at all of the various states that you're working in any of those cases, are you aware of any taxes being levied against any of this revenue? Or is this all no tax money moving around?
I don't believe so, but I'll double check that and can follow up. That's a little bit out of my forestry
Yes,
side.
understood.
I don't believe so. You know, again, we do due diligence on all those types of things, like if there's liens on the property, if there's issues like that, we deal with that before a contract is ever executed. So I don't think so, but I will clarify for sure.
Just point of clarification. So you mentioned we were talking about the current use. In any of the states that you're working with, do these funds affect that current use statute in any of them?
No, because we review them. Every single landowner that comes in that says that they are in current use, we vet that. And if say they have in their management plan, in a state that requires harvesting within their management plan and they have to adhere to that, say New York as an example, you know, we would, if there's a certain stand, we'll exclude that stand that needs to be harvested at a rate that's higher than our allowances. If the whole property is not compliant, we will say, we don't want to jeopardize your current use, and we won't enroll them. So no, we have not to date had any issues with landowners in current use.
Okay, just one more, real quickly, sir. So you work in a lot of other states. What would you say the percentage of states that you work in actually have a required harvest in theirs?
Very few. Most of them are focused on keeping forests as forests, just ensuring that that forest land stays as forest land. So we don't have very many. I think the majority of the 20 states that we work within, the goal is simple, is that they have a management plan, or that they have forests and they keep it as forests. It's very few states that go to that level because it puts undue burden on the landowner in many times.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. This is really good. Learning a lot. And you're very good. You're very good in explaining all of this. I want to follow up on Erica for a second, though. On the tax issue. So if a landowner enters into a contract with you and they're receiving, and DRA is probably, I'm going to probably turn to DRA here to flesh this out a little bit. If they enter into that contract and they've received remuneration for that, then they have to report that.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
just have to report that on their income tax return.
get a 1099.
As income, I guess. It's a 1099,
Yep.
right? You're 1099. Okay. Stay on the taxes just for a second before we go to valuations and stuff. So you're taking that property for some of the reasons you've said you want to get that property under management. Okay, I would assume you do your own analysis or whatever. I don't know. This is a side question. Do you deny many people? I'm curious. And have you had like properties that just don't work for you? People have come to you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
I should have pulled the numbers, but it's the majority of the people don't sign. And that could be because somewhere along the process, they said, you know what, this is not a good fit for me, or we found a reason that it's not a good fit. Our goal is to make sure that the landowner and their goals match with our goals. And so absolutely, we turn folks away. However, I would say more so we turn certain stands away. So again, that's a big benefit of our program, that they don't have to enroll all of their forested acres. So if they have a goal in one stand of their forest, say 100 100 acres out of their, 400 that they want to do a lot more active management, we may exclude that. So that happens more often, I would say, than like whole properties. However, if the landowner is very interested.
So to go to this point directly, as you divvy up that property then, that land, do you allow them to cut and when there's a harvest in New Hampshire, obviously the yield tax. So when there's a harvest, is that going to you? Is that that income's going purely to them, and that's part of the forest management plan that you have agreed to, that you're going to harvest over the next 20 years? We believe you can harvest this, and you go harvest and you do that. You take care of it. You file all the paperwork. You pay the yield tax.
The landowner. So the landowner gets all the profit. The landowner is responsible for all that. We may provide guidance to do that, but we don't take any of the profit from any of the harvests that happen. We'll help them get a forester to help administer that harvest, but that's all on them. And in terms of like if they're doing a heavier harvest and they have a plan for a heavier harvest and we exclude that area, our forest management plan covers all of their forested area. So that is a way that we deal with like the leakage and the additionality and things like that is we require a management plan and provide guidance on sustainable forestry even outside of their enrolled areas. So yeah, but as far as the taxes and all that, that is the landowner's responsibility. Again, we may provide some connection to assistance with that, but they get all the profit from any management that happens.
Okay, and to go to, you talked about you have, you look at the properties, obviously, it's a tool, you provide a tool for landowners to be able to deal with this, and carbon to manage their properties. Carbon is one of the components of those tools. Couple questions real quick, and it does go to tax. Do you know, as a percentage of the amount of property that you have under contract, acreage-wise, do you know what percentage of that acreage is in carbon? Or can you provide that? I'd be very interested.
All of it would be in you mean in terms of the program? So their total acreage that is eligible that they choose to enroll. So they can also choose how much they want to enroll. That is what's under contract in our program that they receive the financial payments for and that we have a carbon right to. So it's whatever they want, whatever they choose voluntarily to enroll and what is eligible within our program, of course. We have certain eligibility parameters to ensure that we generate carbon based on our modeling and things like that.
So to be simplistic and to go to Charlie's question originally, if these properties are registered, or when they're registered, right, when they're registered, then we'll know how many of acreage you have in carbon of your customers in the state of New Hampshire.
Absolutely.
When it gets registered.
Absolutely.
Okay. When you make money on the carbon credit, if you have property in New Hampshire that's making money on a carbon credit, okay, where are you reporting the income for that or what? I'm curious how it works for you as an entity. You're a not-for-profit. Obviously, you got to make money. You have administrative costs alone. So where do you pay the tax on that? On the carbon credit, if you made money on the carbon credit?
Well, we do pay like any normal business registration fees for each state, that type of thing. So we would pay it through that route. And then in terms of what we report our financials every year as a nonprofit, and so we do it through that as well. We also provide reports of our progress and how much carbon we've generated and how many things we've sold publicly as they happen. For example, we have a deal with Netflix. We release that so that our landowners know. We provide updates to our landowners, quarterly in the lease, but we also send them every year. So we do all that reporting voluntarily and also abide by any state regulations that we have to administer our business.
Charlie?
Thank you very much. 3 questions. I had one, and based on what you've just been talking about, I have 2 more. So this registration with the state part, so we have somebody from the tax collecting agency here, Jennifer, and so are you saying that AFF is registered to do business in New Hampshire and that AFF pays the business profits tax or business enterprise tax? Those are the 2 business taxes we have. Is that what you're saying?
Where it's required, I believe. However, let me clarify. It's a little bit out of my expertise, but I'd be happy to follow up and ensure, I have the accurate data.
All right. Question 2, the leakage issue. So somebody enrolls 20% of their ownership. They decide to do heavy harvests on the remaining forest land that they own. How would you know that?
We have a forest management plan for the whole property.
Yeah.
So we also, we remotely monitor, but only our enrolled area.
Right.
So we would be able to see it based on that. However, we don't have any right to it. So we would encourage that happens sustainably. We provide them the tools so that we hope they do it sustainably. And if it doesn't, then we have some fallbacks like buffer pools and things within Vera to make up for that. And so
Okay, so you have no way of really knowing what they're doing on the non-enrolled acres specifically. Here's an example. I've had landowners who I've done a management plan for, done an actual harvest, and I learned 3 years later that they went in and cut again. I didn't even know. They hired a logger and went in and cut again. And clearly that can happen in this situation. So leakage, because you don't require enrolling all the acreage, leakage definitely probably is happening on some of
It
this.
probably is. Yeah, I would say that it probably is. And again, we have certain things in place to like buffer pools and those types of initiatives to account for that. We believe though that the flexibility is really important. And so we take that on. We take that leakage risk on because we want our landowners to have the flexibility on their land. And so again, that's a risk we take. However, I will say as our program becomes more mature and we all learn more about leakage across all of the different programs and the standards and things like that, it is certainly something that we're getting better at addressing. And I would be happy to follow up with you, Charles, and connect you to our science team who really knows the ins and outs of additionality and leakage issues within the standards.
All right, thank you. One final question. This was my original question. Last year, I asked Rita Height, your CEO, about the profit sharing plan and when exactly that would kick in, and she didn't have an answer for me. So do you have that specifically now, what the market needs to do for carbon sales to actually kick that in so a landowner will get some of the extra revenue that you will get?
Well, I probably have the same answer as Rita still because not a lot has changed since then. We have it in our contracts that if we do see a profit, the reality of this business is that it's a lot of upfront costs. And so, the landowner is getting the majority of that benefit, the financial benefit. There's people like me that administer the program. But when we see a profit, because we're a nonprofit, they will see it. But I have the same answer as Rita.
So the specific language, just final follow-up, the specific language is if you have a profit, and you've defined what that means in these contracts, so the landowner actually knows when this would kick in?
They won't know exactly when it'll kick in because it depends on what the market does. So, if the market crashes for whatever reason, we're certainly gonna have a lot less profit, right? Or if the market goes up, there's no way for us even to know that because the market fluctuates. But if there is a profit, they will see it.
Thank you.
Just real quick, Sarah, do you have a generic contract on your website or whatever that shows what it looks like?
We used to, but it's proprietary. So there's a lot of competitors and things like that. Anyone who signs an NDA, landowner, forester, we're happy to provide it, but we don't provide it freely because it is proprietary.
So since we're talking about money, let's follow the money. Do you folks have a public list of who is buying credits through you and how, who donates? Because at the seed of all of my little questions are, do we have foreign entities buying carbon credits in the US to tie up our forest and I'm concerned like Canada?
Sure. Yeah, I can understand that concern. We would share who the companies that have agreed to go public. However, we do vet who buys our credits, as I mentioned earlier. So certainly if there was an entity that was high risk for security purposes or for, is not someone who's trying to get to net zero, we would not sell our credits to them. So in terms of your worry about foreign entities, the landowners retain all of their rights. So, the only right we have is the carbon, and the private entity has no right to that. They're buying the credits. So we own, as American Forest Foundation, own the carbon rights. The landowner retains all the other rights. So there would be no risk of foreign entity, even if they bought a carbon credit, because there's no right to that land.
Who are some of the public companies that have gone public that participate with you folks?
REI was our first one, so the outdoor company. Netflix is the most recent one. So those type, Bank of America is another one. So those are some of our biggest ones. And, you know, they do buy considerable amounts. We don't have, you know, like tons of them. We have handfuls of people companies who have bought our credits. Absolutely.
Just a quick question. Thank you for taking my question.
Absolutely.
This is, I still have a lot to learn, and I'm not afraid to admit that. But some of the stuff I've heard about is land that is in conservation or not really in risk of being cut doesn't qualify for a carbon program. And I'm going back to your presentation. Say I have a sugar bush that's 50 acres. Can I put that in carbon even though I have absolutely no intention of cutting it?
Yes. And the reason is because, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but our intention is not always what actually happens, right? So action does not always match intention. And that is because, I forget who said it, but we're people, things come up. Something may happen and they need to liquidate. Our contract helps prevent that. Our financial assistance helps prevent that. So the way that our methodology also works, and I'd be happy to follow up and give you more details instead of spending time going into the details here. But our methodology accounts for that. So we have a dynamic baseline. We were one of the first carbon programs to do that, which means we're not using a computer model to say, in absence of our program, we think X would happen. Because we are actually measuring trees on enrolled properties, comparing them to what's happening in FIA, which is also real time, catches what happens in the market, catches any regulation changes, et cetera, that we're comparing them apples to apples. So it accounts for things like that, which basically raises the integrity of our carbon credit because we're proving that it's truly additional by having that dynamic baseline.
One quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So if I have a piece of property that is registered in conservation, can the carbon be sold?
Yes, as long as the timber is harvestable, then it is additional. So basically, if a landowner has an easement that says you can't cut timber, or you can only cut within X amount, which is similar to ours, we won't enroll that because our carbon would not be additional. So does that cover? Okay, you're welcome.
That's okay. Thank you. A lot of good questions, really good presentation. Thank you. I did want to emphasize the basis of AFF's program is it's a both and harvesting and carbon credits. It's not either or. So it's an interesting model that AFF has where they're paying landowners to manage, which produces wood products and produces good quality management on the forest and produces timber tax and so on, the wood supply chain we're all concerned about. My question, Sarah, is the silviculture that's the focus of your program. So even age management is not an acceptable practice. Is that correct?
It depends on the goal and it depends on the forest condition. Depends
Right.
on really what the landowner wants.
If there's a degraded stand in one part, let's say they got 400 acres and 100 acres was like the elderly sisters there, they'd really like to start that forest over. That's the right silvicultural prescription probably is to just have a do-over, a clear cut.
We excluded that stand.
Right. But that's what I'm saying. I'm not,
Yep.
it's not a gotcha question. It's just, I just wanted to hone in on the fact that the silviculture is really uneven age, partial thinnings, correct?
Correct.
Has there been any foresters in the Northeast expressed concern about the proliferation of beech in the understory?
Them and me myself.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, you work with the consulting foresters to do the best you can and minimize the undesirable growing species on the forest.
Yes, and landowners are also allowed to do anything, any sort of management or removals under 5 inches. So that
Okay.
also helps with that.
Okay.
And they are allowed to treat. So in that case, you could treat the parent beech, which
Yeah.
would get rid of the sprouts, right? Or at least try to.
Try to slow it down.
Also hope that, hate to say hope, but beech leaf can maybe help us out a little bit. Beech leaf disease. So. Yeah, we have a lot of folks express that. And again, on that flexibility part, if there are stands that are, need to be reset or have prolific invasive issues, like tree of heaven or something that actually gets to larger diameter, we will exclude those stands so they can be managed
Right.
properly.
Right.
And I would also point out, just since you brought up beach, if something like spongy moth comes along, we also have cases to handle that where like an invasive species comes in, takes out a whole stand. If it's not their fault, we'll actually remove those acres from the remainder so that they can treat that problem. They won't be penalized, but they will not get payments for the rest of that. And we've had that actually happening right now. In Pennsylvania, we have an enrolled landowner. I think it was like 60 acres that has mortality from spongy moth oak, and so we just excluded that, and now they can go in and harvest it. So that again, a risk we take with our
Yeah.
carbon, but want to make sure that the silviculture makes sense.
Great, thank you. Can I have just one follow-up?
Of course.
Matt touched on it earlier. There's some concern about where the credits are being sold. If it were to come about that New Hampshire required that carbon developers divulge where the credits are being sold, how complicated would that be to find out through AFF where they go?
So we would not be able to comply with that as written. I mean, I'd be happy to follow up with you on that and look into it more. Because our credits are sold on a landscape level, we cannot say the carbon generated on this enrolled property in New Hampshire was sold to X. We could provide a list of who we sell all our credits to, if that was a requirement, but we would not be able to comply with that
The
on a
specific
credit per credit
per
basis.
acre of New Hampshire ground where it went.
Yeah, we
right.
would not be able to comply with that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Looks like you're off the hot seat.
Thank you very much for having me, and very good questions. I really appreciate it.
Sarah,
you,
thank
Chairman.
you for coming in.
I
Thank you.
would ask, Mr. Chairman, if you could send that presentation to the committee and
Absolutely.
they could forward that to us.
Yeah, and I have some cards here.
My
if
old
anyone-
eyes don't see as good as they probably should.
Mine either. I get it.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, new business. I have something I'd like to share with the group. We had a bill, House Bill 1752. It was a chain of custody bill. And I apologize for not vetting it through this committee before it went to the RR&D committee. I had an opportunity, I'm working for my constituents, and I had an opportunity to put a bill which, what it actually did, Pat just kind of touched on that. It would give the carbon registry, the people selling the carbon would have to divulge who they're selling it to. I know Maine is doing that with their carbon registry. They sort of copied our registry, but they added that to it. And there were two parts to this bill. The first part had a chain of custody for timber, and I wasn't really for it, but the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources seemed to want it, so I went along with that. But the second part was the carbon part, and I found it would be, why wouldn't we want to know who's buying the carbon? It's a very simple ask. I guess I realize it gets touchy on these smaller parcels, but I think the larger parcels would be easier to track. I don't know if we could carve out under a certain acreage that would be allowed if it gets too confusing for these smaller parcels. But what I would like to do is work on a bill to present next term and bring it in for the committee to vet it, and we'll go over it and see, I'd just like to run that by everybody. So, and this one will not have the timber on it. It'll just be the carbon section of it. But Charlie.
So I had a question just generally about you legislators filing stuff while this commission is operating. So I hear you understand this concern about doing that before this group has reached any conclusion. So thank you for that. On the carbon market issue, why would you do that if you're not going to do it for timber? I'm not in favor of doing it for timber, but why are you singling out carbon as a sale product from the property? What about maple sap? Do landowners have to divulge who they're selling their maple sap to? Do they have to divulge who they're selling their saw logs to or their chips? I don't understand why you would single out carbon in wanting to know who's buying it, where we don't do that for other products off forest land now. I think it's proprietary information, and I don't think it's a good idea to ask that.
Okay, well, I'll give you my reasoning for it. Let's say Canadian companies wanted to buy up a bunch of carbon in northern New Hampshire, tie up our timber for decades, maybe even up to a century. And then we have no way of selling that if there's that takes away the competition for Canadian timber. The other thing would be, if everything's put into carbon in northern New Hampshire, let's say it was somebody competing for energy. We have no way of, I don't think we should be selling carbon to foreign adversaries.
But this carbon is not owned by the state. It's owned by private landowners. It's a product owned by landowners, just like timber is. That's why I don't think it's a good idea to do it. You can't prevent landowners from selling a Forever Wild conservation easement on their property, which would prevent harvesting of timber forever. You can't prevent that now. That's a landowner right. And so this is just something that is the camel's nose under the tent, way too far, trying to sort of control this information. It is a proprietary set of information along with timber, maple sap, and a whole bunch of other things that landowners own on their property. So I understand your concern that carbon's going to take away timber from our marketplace, but right now, we do have a moratorium, but right now, we only have 188,000 acres in New Hampshire that are in carbon projects. That's not affecting the marketplace at all. And it could in the future, but the trend is that it's not going to, because carbon is not valued enough to get a lot of landowners to sell it. But singling this one issue out amongst many landowner rights that are out there, I would not support that.
Okay.
You want to say something? Oh, go ahead. I'll follow up after.
No, Charlie, I appreciate what you say. I don't totally agree with what you just say. There's an ethos that somehow carbon is just like everything else, as we've managed our forests for centuries, to be perfectly blunt, and for 75 years with the yield tax. Now, a smaller 20-year program, yes, I would argue is very different than a 100-year program. But a state has a right, and you can talk about property owner rights all you want, okay? The state has a right to manage its natural resource, and it has a right to know who has the ability to effectuate that natural resource. And that's the difference. If you enter into a 100-year agreement on a larger parcel of property, and you have the Chinese that own it on the backside, they've got an encumbrance on that property. They do. And that's just, and for you to say that, well, carbon's just like everybody else, and we need that because that's what's going to make all of this financially work for all of you, for warehouses, the big boys, or for the little boys, it's not compelling to me.
The state doesn't own these rights.
I think it's that the state has a right in its natural resource, and the state has a right to know whether or not a Chinese company owns a water, okay, and there's a difference in ownership. Yes, there is, but the contract on the carbon credit is encumbering that piece of property. Sarah just told you how it affects. They, for all intents and purposes, are managing that property for those people. Okay, I just don't buy it. Okay, I don't, and I think there are national security issues out there. I think you do have a right. The state has a right to know if their forest property is being encumbered by the Chinese, the Saudis, or the Canadians. And I think it's a legitimate.
But it's not state property. It's private property.
It's private property in the context of the borders of a state that has laws. Absolutely, it does. I disagree with you.
Go ahead.
Just a quick thing. In the airline industry, they're looking to buy credits. do you know how many credits are available in the market today? For sale?
Carbon?
Yeah,
No.
22 million. What's the demand in the next 24 to 30 months? 100 million. It's a commodity market. We're going to see changes in the price of carbon.
Yes, Chris.
Thank you. I want to say first, I appreciate you bringing up HB 1752. As Charlie said, NHTOA has been disturbed with the fact that as there's a moratorium going on and this commission is supposed to be looking into these things, there's been active legislation being presented by members of the commission about forest carbon without any discussion here. So I do appreciate that. Thank you for bringing it back here and for giving us the opportunity to have this debate. Obviously, from what we're hearing now, it's important, and I think these things are important for us to discuss and then to go down some rabbit holes to try to figure out. I wanted to just go back to your statement that Maine is doing this. We have a carbon project in Maine. Maine is not requiring this, what you're proposing. So just to be clear, what Maine has that New Hampshire doesn't right now, I believe what you might be referring to is that they ask the landowner to provide the information on the registry that the carbon credits are listed on.
Who they're selling it to.
Who is selling those carbon? So the registry sells the carbon credits. So I believe earlier there was reference to Vera. There's the American Carbon Registry, ACR. So there are different registries that do most of the selling of the credits. And that's part of the difficulty in knowing then, like for a landowner to be able to say, where is that carbon credit getting sold? But I think it is important to go back to what Sarah said earlier. There's no control over the land by whoever buys that credit. The landowner has decided what they're doing on their piece of property. And frankly, to respond to Mr. Brady, these are private landowner rights that you're talking about. The statement that the state has the right to manage their natural resource, I completely agree with. Their natural resource are the lands that are owned and managed by the Department of Forest and Lands. And they have not only a right, but a responsibility to the people of the state in the management of those lands. But when it comes to what a private landowner is doing with the management of their natural resource, Charlie, he explained this well. They can sell an easement that says we'll never harvest. That's totally legal. That happens in the state. In fact, the state sometimes participates in, the funding for those type of projects because there's something special on that property that they think needs to be protected. So it's important to recognize that the timber, the carbon, the sap, those are all landowner rights. Those are reasons landowners own that land. If you take those away, there is no reason for the landowner to own that property in New Hampshire. Why not just divide it, sell it, and go somewhere else? So I totally disagree in the idea that these are somehow the state's natural resources. We partner with the state in our management of those, but the natural resources, they're the timber, and those things are owned by the landowner that owns the land. Thank you.
Yes, Chairman. There was just a comment made about how the landowner can do what they want to do with the land after these carbon credits. I must have misheard because from what I took from the presentation, they can harvest up to 25% of the land. So 75% of their parcel is encumbered with the agreement on a carbon purchase. And when we look at, that it's the state land versus private property, I understand that. It's very different when you harvest sap versus when you clear cut or you cut out 100 acres. We also have to remember that these larger parcels, everything over 10 acres, is in current use. So that does affect the state. that does affect property taxes, that does affect revenue. Please also remember that 18% of our state is all we have left to build on for housing, as we face the #1 economic crisis in our state. So when it is a state issue, because when we look at the taxation of how folks make the money and we balance the budget, it does impact that. It is not an apple and an orange. They all intertwine. Thank you,
Thank you.
Chairman.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up real quick. It is ludicrous to sit here and say that the state doesn't have an interest in how you warehouse what you do with your property. I'm not saying, we'll sit there and we can argue, do they have a right to tax you? A yield tax? Do they have a right to? Yeah, they do. The state has decided from a public policy perspective that it does, that it believes it does. And it's been doing it for 75 years. Now carbon comes in here and it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's not the same, but it's different, but it's not. Okay, all of a sudden it's gonna make all of your lives easier. It's gonna create more money, and maybe it may be right. You may, absolutely, okay? Maybe you're not, but my point is this, regardless. Yes, you're private property owners in the context of a state, that you have a legislature that meets, and if the public policy is to want to do that, then and they believe it's in the interest and it's constitutional, then you can do it. And this abstract discussion, well, it's my property and the state can do what it wants on its own property, but on our property you can't, that's ludicrous to me. It's absolutely ludicrous.
Yes, Chris. Go ahead, Mike.
No,
I'm okay.
sorry.
Don't know if you're looking for a reply.
No, whatever you want.
I think you made 2 points there, and one was about taxes. And we had some good questions earlier about taxes. And I think that's a very different thing. The state's right, what they have decided is appropriate for taxes, as you mentioned, the yield tax, timber tax, current use taxation, versus ownership of the timber and decisions about the timber or the carbon and what's done with that. So I would just differentiate there a little bit. When I'm talking about the state's interest, clearly the state has, and if you all decide a new tax is the right thing to do, and the legislature agrees, then, it'll be a new tax. But I think that's one of the things we're tasked with looking into. I mean, it clearly is from our objectives as a commission, is to look into the tax implications. So I would fully support us doing that, looking at if there was to be a tax, where would that be appropriate? What would it be most like? We've had some conversations, not within this group, but with most of the members of this group, about the yield tax and why the yield tax is not a good fit for carbon. But that is not to say that a transaction should not be taxed. And I think there were a lot of good questions earlier about how does that work? Who gets taxed? Where do they pay those taxes? So, thank you.
All right, can I do a follow-up real quick? One more. Yeah, the only thing, Kristen, thank you for the comments. You sit here and we're through, this is our third or fourth session. And there is an ethos with from what I'm hearing, with some, that carbon is just another little tool in your forest management tool chest that's not really going to change anything. It's going to make things better and leave us alone. And I'm listening to all of this and saying, okay, yeah, I get it's a tool. I get it might very well be in your best interest, all of our best interest, maybe. As I said, remember the first time we ever met, we could be very agnostic about this one way or the other. Just we've set up a system in this state that revolves around the yield tax. That's a municipal, that feeds municipalities. And it looks like that's being changed. When you get into, to go to Arnie's bill though, and carbon does have differences than what we've been doing. It has implications. That's very different. And I don't know how you can sit there and say it's not. 100-year contracts on property, okay, as the way you manage the forest management, I would argue with you, you probably ought to go look at your forest management statutes that are in the state and probably update them all based on integrating in carbon management into, as it becomes part of the nomenclature for forest management. And I think that's part of the point. That's what I'm trying to say. But there are big implications with 100-year contracts and who owns them in markets that become international, et cetera.
I'm going to allow, I know Charlie's you got something to say? I'm going to allow a couple more, then I want to wrap this up. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I won't belabor that discussion that's happened. I just had a couple things. Director Hackley and I were involved in producing this last year. It's really the PowerPoint that I gave in November on steroids. It's got a lot of detailed stuff. The main author is Dr. Kosiba from the University of Vermont. And so I wanted to make sure you all had a copy of that. If anybody else wants one, we can get lots of copies of this. It's a great publication on this whole topic, including markets, but all the biology and all that stuff as well. The other thing I wanted to ask about is I was looking over our charge as a commission in the final version of House Bill 123. And I guess I'm asking you, Mr. Chairman, if you have a good sense on these points that we have to fulfill by the time we're done, how we're going to do that. Do you have a plan in place or something in mind that'll be over the next year where we'll be able to gather the information that this requires us to gather to be able to report on it or not?
I do.
Okay.
This today was the first of a three-part. I would like to have maybe Tom Hahn come in for our next meeting and go over these were the smaller projects. I'd like to go over bigger projects, maybe have Aurora come in or somebody from Aurora.
Well, you don't want those people. If you want somebody to do what we heard from Sarah this morning, you want the other developers here. And that's not Tom Hahn. That's not any of those. That's not Aurora. Aurora is a seller of carbon. So for the big projects, you probably want Finite Carbon because they've got a number of the big projects in New Hampshire. They would be the ones to have in here to talk about the big projects. But there are alternative projects for smaller landowners that are out there, particularly something that has been around for as long as this program that we heard about, Forest Carbon Works in their Chestnut Carbon program, and then also Land Yield. So those are the two others that actually purchase carbon directly and sell it from landowners, unlike the program we heard about today. And they're specifically for small landowners as well. So if we want to get a sense of all of that in terms of the developers, those are the people we should have in here. Tom Hahn represents landowners.
Okay.
And so he's going to be talking about it from a landowner perspective, which is important. But Chris Fife is here on the commission, and they are a landowner that has sold carbon. So we have that perspective. But I think we want those other developers in. If you remember the presentation I made in November, I talked about those. And I'm quite sure we could get somebody from Finite Carbon and probably Forest Carbon Works / Chestnut Carbon in to talk about their programs, which are different than what we heard today.
Okay. Yeah, that was my plan for the next meeting, to have some larger land groups.
Okay.
Just to clarify, and you all know this, but I mean, I'm here representing NHTOA. Charlie is correct. Weyerhaeuser has a carbon project in Maine and a couple others around the country, and we are our own developer. So we have not engaged a developer in those. We're also a carbon developer.
Right.
But the requirements in the bill are not going to be fulfilled by having Finite Carbon and
No,
Chestnut Carbon.
I just
right?
want
This-
everybody to get a
Yeah,
feel of the.
understood. I think it's necessary,
process.
but it's asking us to do some very specific things.
Yeah, there's eight
And
topics.
as I go through these, I mean, I think for the most part, I sent you all this report from DRA, their final report that came out in the fall based on the 2024 bill. And so I think that fulfills probably one of these. And their conclusion was totally inconclusive about whether or not these projects are affecting what's happening with timber tax. But for instance, there's going to be a need, if you want to actually fulfill the requirements, to do some survey work with various audiences to find out information, because we don't have this information. I know I don't have it, and it's not out there publicly. So you know, if we're gonna do some of that stuff, I'm guessing we have no budget for this commission, is that right?
Right.
And so we have no content staff who can go out and do research for us, is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so, I mean, everybody, maybe the next meeting, we could go through this list and maybe try to figure out how we're gonna do this between now and when this ends in 2027. Because without money in a budget, I don't know how we fulfill some of those requirements, if we intend to try to meet the requirements in the commission charge.
All right. Any other new business? Oh, I'm sorry.
I guess I'm following up a little bit on what Charlie just talked about. So that, this is all brand new to me, and I would very much be a no tax, leave me alone, this is my property. That would be my soul talking. But as I'm learning about how all these things work, I think there's new technology, this carbon is out there, it's a new thing. And when I think about tax, at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon the state and the town to collect tax so you can provide the services you have. And when a landowner makes a decision that impacts their ability to do that, that changes our thinking. We have to think differently, because we have to balance a budget. You either have to provide the services or you don't. And when you have counties and regions saying that they can't afford to pay for the services, if this is affecting it, then we have to address it. And I guess that's really the ultimate goal of this is, are they affecting it and how do we address it? And I think the idea of land ownership gets mixed up in the middle of that because they made a decision or want to make a decision. And can we allow that decision and not affect everybody else in the community? So I think there is an element of having to think outside the box a little bit, I guess. I guess it's not a question.
Okay.
But
Anybody else? Okay. Date of next meeting. I have April 17th. It's a Friday at 10 o'clock. Does that work for everybody? April 17th. So I believe it's a Friday. You good?
like last year, I'll be tentative, depends on how much it takes to get back.
Okay. Right, the only other, I need a motion to adjourn.
Before, I just want to make sure that my request to include
Yes.
our discussion of this is on the next agenda,
Yep.
so we can actually have some detailed discussion about how we're going to do this. Thank you.
Let me just-
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor? Not gonna ask for opposed.